On this week's episode of NY Seed Round, I have Taylor McLoughlin. He's the co-founder of a company called Ambient, which is one of the first ever AI assistants built specifically for chiefs of staff. During this episode, I talked to him a lot about founder burnout. It's an issue that's impacted his career as a multi-time founder, so I wanted to talk to him a little bit about what were the signs, and then what were the techniques that he's developed through the years to deal with it. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and let me know what your tips and tricks are for managing stress in a startup environment. So Taylor, appreciate you being here. Tell me a little bit about the company you're building, Ambient. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but for those that have never heard of Ambient, what are you working on?
We're building AI assistants for chiefs of staff, heads of operations, and founders. So these are the special operators inside a company. And what Ambient aims to do is save them time, help them drop fewer balls, executing the strategy that they actually set out. And so we've been on this journey for a little bit under a year now.
Why did you and your co-founder decide to build this company? Why was this the right one?
Yeah, this was actually a pivot. So me and the other co-founders, so Brandon Ketcher, our CTO, and Lawrence, our CEO, met with the founding team in San Francisco early last year, coming off of the big waves of ChatGPT.
Right.
And previously, we'd been working on a company called Twine, building remote and distributed team software. So connecting these silos being remote employees. And we worked on that problem for about 3 years, and we couldn't help but think through, how does this new technology reframe how to think about this problem of bridging silos in a company, but not the people silos, the systems. Each team across an organization uses different tools to do their jobs, and it's no one's job, at the time we thought, it was no one's job to actually make sense of what's actually happening at the ground level. And that kind of took us on this route where we eventually found our ICP, Chief of Staff.
Yeah, this is a really interesting customer base. I feel like this will be helpful for founders who have like a very unique base that they're selling into, and we'll talk about how you learned more about chief of staffs. But first, I'm kind of curious. Something I've noticed is you aren't the first founder involved with generative AI that has talked about the need to pivot or burn the boats. Like I met one just today that they were talking about, we had to burn the boats 3 times this year alone. Is this unique to generative AI? Is it just the speed at which you have to just pivot to stay competitive?
Yeah, I don't think it's unique to Gen AI in the sense that any new big technological wave has necessitated the need to evolve and adapt. I think the pace at which new model updates are coming out, the step changes in capabilities, is introducing the need to have to adjust more rapidly. And to very new extremes because it's so new. And I think about the wave of mobile in 2007 when the first iPhone came out, how rudimentary it feels now to look at that and where we are today. But each year there was a new device with some new capability. That's a different periodicity of change. Now it's every month, sometimes every week you hear something new, or you see these new demos of image generation. It's like it gets the mind spinning about what's next. What could we do with this?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And we'll get into the chief of staff piece, but one more follow-up here. Designing product roadmaps, like that has to be such a unique challenge now.
I was literally just doing some writing about this. I grew up really obsessed with Legos, loved building stuff. I would get the new Lego set. I wouldn't even open up the manual. I would just look at the picture and just put it together.
Mm-hmm. That's impressive. It takes me like 12 hours. The last one, I'd made a lighthouse and it took me forever.
But it's this somewhat mindless act of creation that is so, I think, calming. I think that's why I gravitate towards it. But building product roadmaps today, you have to be really comfortable with building up this beautiful tower, then having your dog run by and knock the table over and it comes crashing down into pieces. And you have to look at that and not feel that sinking feeling of all that time wasted. You got to pick the pieces up, start putting it together. And as you put it together, you might find something new. You have to be really comfortable with that constant need to reinvent. And it will happen when it's not on your schedule. And that's why it's hard.
That's a great image. And hopefully that's really helpful for others that are experiencing that currently. Maybe they're building something for the last 6 months and then they see something that's just been shipped and they're like, oh, I have to start over again. Yeah. This lighthouse now has to be a Lamborghini that I have to build.
Exactly. Yeah. You get emotionally wedded to the thing you're creating. How could you not? You're putting your heart and soul into it. And then when you have to say, take it down and rebuild it piece by piece, you got to have a lot of grit and resilience to be able to want to do that time in and time again.
That makes sense. So back to your customer,
Yeah.
chief of staffs. They're a really unique audience. I am not a chief of staff. I have a sense of what they do, but tell me more about this specific ICP.
They're so interesting. My co-founder and I have probably spoken to about 500 chiefs, heads of ops over the course of 9 months. And we've learned a few things. There's no standard background that they come from. They have varying skill sets and capabilities. They don't shy away from uncertainty. They lean into the environment that requires them to juggle competing needs, competing priorities, and they bias towards action. They bias towards what do we do about this? So they're the ones that really go from what do we do to how do we do it. They're critical at that part of the equation of getting things done. And they call themselves a force multiplier.
Oh, really?
Which is for a reason. And the idea is when you have a chief of staff paired up with a CEO founder, the idea with having a chief of staff is to go do the jobs that the founder would have normally done, freeing them up to go do the next high leverage thing, figure out that next new segment, that next market to go into. So there's immense trust that's built, and it's a unique relationship that doesn't really exist anywhere else inside of business. You have somebody that can go from hiring people to standing up a new organization on the finance side to running special projects, and all of that in the same week. It takes a special person to flex into that. So we think about them like special operators. They're like
Gotcha.
special ops.
We'll get into learning more about
Yeah.
the audience. Any specific qualities, just for maybe if chief of staffs are listening, like what makes good ones versus like great ones?
Low ego.
Low ego.
You're not going to get credit.
Right.
Don't look for it.
Don't get credit. Okay. Gotcha.
You're going to be the one that is getting things done. Puppet master. They're really, the best ones really are tactful with how they manage the interpersonal relationships amongst the executive team, which is all art, no science. But they can also flex into hardcore modeling, whatever that, left brain, right brain demand is going to be. So highly adaptable, patient, low ego. I think those are qualities that I see cutting across the board.
Yeah, when I think of chief of staffs, I think like, CEO or executive, like they set the vision, they work with a partner potentially, and then they tell the chief of staff, okay, go do this, go put this into action. And that's a quality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's biased towards action. Okay. How are we going to do this? Yeah.
Gotcha. So you mentioned talking to 500 chief of staffs. I bet that's one of your recommendations. Are there any others? Like, how did you really embed yourself with this audience, learn them, learn how to position things to them? What was your process?
Yeah. It's personal because my co-founder and I have worked together for 9 years. When I joined his company, I eventually reported to who would become the chief of staff. And we were charted with figuring out how do we solve this puzzle of scaling the business, opening out a new market, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a deep level of empathy we have. And I think that's something you get lucky if you find a ICP you want to build for who you see a lot of yourself in. So there's a lot of just natural curiosity there. Curiosity, by the way, is probably the other marquee trait of a chief of staff, is someone that's highly curious. Getting close to them, like I said, talking to them, but being a part of the community too. So we've been working really closely with a few communities, Ask a Chief of Staff led by Clara Ma, the Chief of Staff Network, and a few others.
So there's significant networks.
There are significant networks, but you start to see the same faces. And I think it's about building that trust because they are, again, high leverage role. They don't have a lot of free time. Sound like a founder, right?
Yeah.
Not too dissimilar. And building trust with this type of audience takes a lot because the kind of stuff they're working on is serious.
Gotcha.
And so if you're going to build software for this audience and they're going to use it in their day-to-day workflows, know that their audience is also the C-suite. You can't have mess ups. You got to have quality. You got to be reliable. All these other traits.
Got it. So to summarize the awesome, exciting thing that you're building, what does it help solve? Why are Asana or Monday.com, why are they not good solutions for this audience?
Yeah, there's this interesting dynamic. So the chiefs are involved with the execution of the strategy. So they do interface with teams that use these project management tools, but they also have to help set the strategy, working with exec staff to formulate the plan. And so we see this gap in between strategy and execution where the existing tools today that help you project manage don't really roll up to the OKRs or whatever you're.
It's not a series of tasks necessarily.
It's not. Yeah. It's not. And so our tool really focuses on 3 main data sources: chat, email, meetings. The C-suite don't use Asana, Monday.com, ClickUp. they have a project management system, and it's called the chief of staff. And so the chief doesn't have anyone else reporting to them usually. And so there's this huge burden on admin level work that exists. So planning meetings, facilitation, documentation, action item extraction, with an eye towards prioritization. And if you saw the product, you'd see a couple things that are very chief of staff focused. One of them is this Eisenhower matrix that we productize to literally go from your 10 meetings in a day to driving prioritization on what you and your chief or your principal need to do. And that's all we focus on, is those workflows. A couple other things around the chief principal relationship. There's so much trust there. You literally will have a chief multitasking between their calendar and their principal's calendar, trying to find ways to remove time. And so things like that we're starting to bring into the product. So you're not going to see that kind of focus from an Asana who's building for marketing teams, biz ops teams, product teams, everyone else. These are special operators. They need special tools.
I feel like there's important lessons for folks that are considering taking on incumbents and larger companies. Like there's always either a niche or a specific approach that you can take. I think that's helpful. You've been building in startups for a minute now. You've talked about burnout among chief of staffs, founders. Why is this topic so personal for you?
Oh, it's because I felt it.
Yeah.
It's been a little over 4-year journey now with Ambient. Ambient is about a year old, so before that with Twine. And I've had to go through my own lived experience to understand what it means to be on this journey and to find joy in the journey, to enjoy the process of creation. And with that, all the need to be adaptable to these environments, and it can put a lot of strain on oneself. And so this came from personal experience, especially last year when things were really tough.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of delayed gratification, a lot of hard work with that, and I can see that compounding. How do you define it? Like I was doing some research before this, and there's so many different definitions for it.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there are several definitions for it. I think that points to this, dynamic, which is burnout is not a moment or a specific point in time. It's a spectrum of experience, from exhaustion all the way to outright collapse. People literally leaving the industry. I mean, it can really drive you to change your behaviors. Of the 500 chiefs we've spoken to, I would say maybe 20%, 15 or 20% were in between roles because they needed to come out of it to cool down because they were burning out. They were running too hot. And so I think it's a spectrum. I don't think you wake up one day and you're like, oh, I'm burned out. I think it's a series of events that happen that get worse and worse over time if left unchecked and untreated. That can lead to really specific outcomes, which we can get into.
I have a thought I'd love your reflection on. The more founders I'm meeting here in New York, especially, I just noticed that there's a trait to all of them, and it's that they are building the company of their dreams. They're trying to work on something, but they wouldn't necessarily, they wouldn't be happy working for a large company. And so what you just described, a founder experiencing burnout may cause them to quit what is ultimately their passion, what's their motivation to build something of their own, to go somewhere, in-house because it's safe, but it ultimately doesn't lead to happiness. So it strikes me that like the better path is to address the burnout. It's not to run from it.
Yes. The question that I faced when I was going through my own period of difficulty last summer was, I either stop doing what I'm doing as a career to give myself more capacity for other aspects of life, like building relationships, or I keep working on finding a way to make it kind of fit together and make it more cohesive. And I chose the latter, obviously, because this is something that I feel the most alive doing. And I think there's more work to be done, and there's been some demonstrable improvement. And there's more people kind of paying attention to this too, which is exciting. So I think it's going to make it easier for people to be on the journey for longer.
Yeah, 100%. Let's say they're, founders are watching this or listening to this, and they resonate with this topic. What are some of the signs that they may be experiencing burnout currently, specifically for founders?
Yeah. I'll tell you mine. Poor sleep quality, lower heart rate variability, really important metric. If there's one biometric to pay attention to that's accessible to have, it's HRV. We can get into that a little bit later. Withering relationships. This is a subjective thing, but if you're aware of it, you might be able to see that pattern. one of my other kind of traits that I notice when I start to run hot is I really turn inward, become avoidant, really focusing on just the business, and like health and wellness starts to fade away. I don't nourish my body, eating proper meals, where I'm rapidly eating over the sink, literally, and going between meetings. I mean, giving yourself some time to nourish your body is important to start the day, to operate better. It all makes sense, but in the moment, it's easy to lose track of it because your focus is the business.
Food feels like a process instead of an experience for yourself. Gotcha. Maybe that's why like a lot of founders, like they simplify like their dress code, for example, like how they dress. It simplifies decisions that they may have to make throughout the day. Maybe not the right decision though. Yeah. 100%. Yeah, black is easy, especially in New York. So as I was doing research for this, I was looking into what are different people's perspectives on founder burnout. I found a video from Sam Altman. His solution, he acknowledges that it exists and he has experienced it himself, according to him. His solution is you got to just work through it. What's your take on that kind of perspective? Do you disagree, agree? Would you add anything? What would you say?
I would agree. I think that's the right, at the end of the day, that is the right move to make, is keep going. But I didn't watch the clip. I don't know exactly what clip, but maybe there's more context to it. But I would add, just keep going and here's how.
Yeah.
And get into those details, because it really matters how you go forward, not the fact that you go forward. Yes, you have to keep going forward as a founder. The buck stops with you. When you're in leadership, same thing. When you're chief of staff, same thing. That's the felt experience, that ultimate responsibility. So you have to keep going. But I would say how you do it is not just wake up each day, white knuckle it, just like bulldoze through it, because you will diminish your capacity to recharge and you will continue to run your battery low.
Yeah.
And you will not have a life well lived in terms of relationships, in terms of self-fulfillment outside of what you do for work. These all fall to the wayside.
And to your point, I really try to focus these on, yes, the conceptual, but also, the how. How do you do this? So what tips have you found helpful for tackling burnout?
I think about it. Here's an analogy. So new founder, you just bought this brand new car. Cars rolling off the lot.
Mm-hmm.
Everything works great. It's awesome. Honeymoon period. Fast forward a few years, you put some hard miles on that car. The outside's got a few dings and scratches, but still looks pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Inside might be a little disheveled, and the engines might be running a little low on oil, but you're still moving forward. And then a few thousand miles go by, and something really hard happens, and all of a sudden now the inside's looking really ragged. The outside's looking okay, by the way, but the inside's looking really ragged, unkept. You're out of oil. The engine's running hot. You're idling at 10,000 RPMs. I mean, you're at the rev limiter all the time. What that does, and what's interesting about this, is on the outside, success, on the inside, struggle. And that I think is what the founder journey can feel like most often. You have to project this outward exuberance and positivity, and everything's great, but on the inside, it really might not be.
So you're saying it's sort of an essential quality for a founder to do that, like be a symbol of calm, even if they may be experiencing a storm.
You have to be that settling force for your team. Now, what I've learned about this is you have to take those pit stops, get an oil change, clean up the inside, wash the outside, so that you can keep running at a high tempo without burning fuel too much.
What are some of those pit stops for you? I love to dive into the tactics with this stuff.
So some of the things that went awry for me last year that I started to pay attention to was my sleep, the amount of sleep I had, but also the quality. My heart rate variability was at an all-time low. Can talk about that in a bit. The quality of my relationships, I'm very much turning inward, avoiding interactions that were not core to the business. My focus was just on the business. That was it. And so you start to see these other aspects of life take a back seat. I think those are really important hallmarks to pay attention to, because these things don't happen overnight. These behavior changes start to take effect, and after a week or two, they start to take hold. And then fast forward a month, and you realize I haven't actually worked out in 4 weeks.
Do you think that, and I've seen this out there as well, but do you think burnout is a rite of passage for founders? Does it have to be?
I think it is a rite of passage.
You think so?
And like, that's the culture. I don't think it's a requirement to be successful to burn out.
Mhm.
Again, I think about the journey of a business where you're trying to take it up into the right. Your experience of that journey doesn't have to be equally high and low. The business will go through changes, sometimes multiple in the same day. Your experience of these changes is everything. And so what I've learned through my journey is tactics to downregulate, control the nervous system, but your literal physiology that's creating these chemical changes in your brain that's affecting how you feel because of chaos, because of ups and downs. It's your ability to adapt to that. That's really what keeps burnout regulated.
That makes sense. When you're thinking about how you sort of approach founder burnout for yourself as you've experienced it in the past, um, are there any sort of other practices that you've considered? Like you mentioned your health, or is it exercising more? Is it, I know it's sleeping more. What about some underrated sort of tactics for this as well?
There's something we do every day, multiple times a day. It's breathing.
Yeah.
Breath work.
Breath
is
work.
a important tool to connect right into your nervous system. And there's different types of breath work. And one of my mentors and coaches, his name is Avi Greenberg. I met him when I first moved here in 2018. And we would gather on Friday evenings in someone's driveway in Flatbush on Friday nights as a ragtag group of people, facilitators, big wooden barrel sauna, and 2 ice baths. So this is before doing ice plunges was cool.
Oh man.
We were out there, rain and shine, snow, doesn't matter. And we had these coaches like Avi helping to facilitate the experience of this shock to the nervous system. And the way we would do this is he would coach you through different practices of breath work to cope with this acute stress. You can take that as like going to the gym and working out, then being out on a run or something and applying what you just worked on into the workplace. An example would be going from meeting to meeting. Some go well, some don't go well. When things are not going well, my heart really starts to palpitate, my chest gets tight, I'm not breathing fully. And so those are the moments to try to become aware of and then apply these learnings to downregulate, to get yourself into a much better state.
That makes sense. I still struggle with it. Like with public speaking, I'm always nervous before speaking. You can tell I'm nervous when I'm public speaking. And so I've tried to get better at breathing. Sometimes I feel like I have to speed up. And if I slow down to breathe, then people are going to know you're slowing down to breathe. What would be a tactical tip for me or a founder who's pitching investors that struggles with that?
I actually learned this the other week watching other people speak. And so sometimes I will literally pinch my fingers together to create some kind of physical sensation for my brain to go towards.
Yeah.
And that I really focus on breathing into the belly, which is really into your diaphragm. And so I had a sports injury last year, sidelined me. I'm usually active doing yoga, other stuff. And I had to slow my body down. I had to do other things that I couldn't do with a walking boot. And so I started to work on my core. And the core is not just your abdominals and your obliques that you can see. There's 8 other muscle groups, or 8 total groups. One of them is your diaphragm.
Yeah.
And so breath work, working with a coach like I did with Avi, taught me exercises to work the diaphragm so that you become much more in tune with the physical sensation of breathing. And you can actually feel the differences in about 30 seconds to a minute.
That's awesome. I'm going to take that away. I'm going to use that.
Just like bringing your attention out of what your mind is, which is something that's causing stress, into something else that's
my cheat code is I like to ask questions so that I poll the group. So while they're raising their hands, I'm like, okay, I can breathe now. Quickly breathe. Okay, so from an investor perspective, you're investing in founders, and so one maybe obvious thing that I didn't realize until I read David Rose's book on angel investing, that it's sort of in investors' interest to have a balance of investing enough capital in the business, but leaving enough equity for the founders to be motivated to build the company. And like, that's obvious, right? But it's not something I like wrapped my head around. I always think that it's like an antagonistic sort of relationship. But it also strikes me on this conversation that investors should have an increased interest in founders and making sure that they're staying well and avoiding burnout as well. There's always pressure from investors to grow, right? But maybe they should be more mindful. It's in their best interest to do so. What do you think?
Absolutely. One of our investors, Maven Ventures, they just got back from a founder retreat in Guatemala. I was just texting with one of one of my counterparts there, Robert, and I asked him how it went. I couldn't make the trip, but you can see the investment they're making in creating an environment that can be conducive of the downregulation, of the stepping back for a moment, taking breaths, literally and metaphysically, just looking at things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Being in Mother Nature, it's hard to do that in New York City, as you know, and that's one of my little tactics. Even if it's an hour a week of getting out on the water. I'm a big sailor. I know you're a water person
Yep,
as well.
I am.
There's something about being in touch with a higher power, that being Mother Nature in that case, that really grounds me and creates a sense of humility and
Yeah.
orients me in what can feel like chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. I love water sports for that.
So yes, I think it's in the best interests for investors, absolutely, to be leaning into this moment where founders need help.
Yeah.
They may not be willing to ask for it outright.
Yeah.
And founders to help each other. Like that's one thing. That's one reason why I really wanted to do this conversation.
Yeah.
Was there are many of us out there thinking the same things, experiencing the same things. Hard to talk about sometimes.
Yeah. 100%. Well, I got a ton out of this for myself, and I hope for other founders out there. But who are some of the influential voices for you or folks that have really helped you in your journey?
Yeah. Avi Greenberg, one of my breath coaches, really came to my assistance when I needed to work on that. A new friend he actually connected me with, his name is Jai Bhagat. His handle is Chai with Jai. He makes a really lovely cup of chai tea.
We'll put it in the description.
Yes, wonderful. He's got his own practice now. He's a breathwork practitioner, former chief of staff. He gets the plight of an executive and the demands, but he also has this beautiful marriage of Eastern and Western medicine and culture. He's a wonderful, wonderful human being. Just got introduced to him. I was put onto this clinical psychologist named Stephen Hayes, who's done a lot of research into this thing called psychological flexibility, which basically encompasses everything I've talked about. It's one's ability to adapt to changing circumstances, the ability to shift your mental resources and to adjust your perspective on things, and your ability to handle competing, conflicting desires and demands from your personal life, your work life. So mental flexibility or psychological flexibility is the mind's ability to adapt. And that's all founders do, is constantly adapt. And the practices we talked about, these tactics, I'm still trying to figure out how they all roll up into a broader practice. But I see it no differently than our physical practice, whether it's yoga that you move your body, Pilates, going to the gym, you're working your physical body out, but there's a whole lot to do on the metaphysical side, the psychological side that I get excited.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Well, Taylor, thanks for stopping by. We're rooting for founders just like you, and we're rooting for the Ambient team. So good luck to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.